It's almost impossible to nail that downbeat on that. That was kind of like it. Hey everybody, it's Mike here from The Art of Guitar. I'm extra excited today because I get to talk about one of my favorite guitar players of all time, George Harrison. And in this video, I want to talk about why I consider him the underappreciated secret weapon of the Beatles. I always think about, when you think of bands of 4 or more members, usually 1 or 2 people kind of come out to the forefront as the leaders of the band. Like when you think of Kiss, you probably think of Gene and Paul. If you think of Metallica, James and Lars, obviously, the Stones, Mick and Keith. When it comes to, the Beatles, though, obviously you think of George and Ringo. No, I'm just kidding. Your brain probably glitched right there when I said that. But people mostly think of John and Paul, leaving the other 2 guys sadly in the shadows of these 2 songwriting giants. And I already did a video about Ringo, by the way. Check that out if you want to. But today I want to talk about why George is usually criminally underappreciated, in my opinion, when it comes to what people think he does for the band. I like to think of it like if the Beatles were like a boxing champ. John and Paul would be like the 1-2 punch combination, whereas Ringo would be like the cardio and George would be the footwork. A lot of people overlook the footwork when it comes to fighters, but if they don't have that, they're usually not able to reach that championship level. Let's start off with what George brings to the stage. Now, what I'm about to say might be a little controversial, and a lot of people might disagree with me. If you do, let me know in the comments section. It's totally cool. But I would say George, out of all of them, has the trickiest role to play on stage. Paul being a very close second place. He brings a lot of stuff that I didn't realize was there until I actually had to play his parts one time with a band. Let's talk about his rhythm playing first. If you watch John playing while he's singing, typically he's strumming. So it's kind of like a singer-songwriter up on stage. He's singing the lead part and strumming and holding a very strong rhythm with his strums. And then you have Paul doing those crazy bass lines. So George has to basically weave in between the 2 parts going on. A good example of that is he's the one responsible for doing that descending walk down on Help. And I heard in the studio he had a lot of difficulty doing this because it's not an easy part. I've played that live before, and I always hold my breath when it comes to that part. If you watch the live footage of Help, you'll see John doing his strumming thing and singing, but George has to do this kind of thing. See the in-betweens he's hitting? It kind of feels like a ska riff right there. And then, of course, back to that descending run. In Ticket to Ride, he's the one that has to do that floating arpeggio going on over the top. And he has to bounce that off of what Ringo's doing, so they have to play off each other a little bit, and it's not an easy thing to do live. Not to mention, George has to do that lead lick that I think Paul McCartney actually recorded in the studio, and then go right back to doing that arpeggio thing. It's almost impossible to nail that downbeat on that. That was kind of like it. In She Loves You, once again, John's strumming, and George has to go like this. In betweens. I recall struggling on stage during those parts and looking over and the guy who was doing the John parts was just having the time of his life. Now let's talk about George's solos. I think the hardest part of his solos are that everyone knows them note for note. So because they're so melodic and so musical, if you end up missing a note, it's like a glaring thing that happens. If you're playing a shred solo or some kind of crazy Kirk Hammett thing and you miss 1 or 2 notes, it's usually not the end of the world. But if you mess up a George Harrison solo, the whole room knows right away. Here's a great example of that. In All My Loving, this solo is so bizarre for me. You're just moving all over the place. You're playing these dyads, you're just kind of trying to make everything flow as much as possible. But at the same time, there's sort of this real crudeness to it too. When I played this live, I botched the descending part on the second time around, like this. kind of panicked like that. And it's funny because I was like, uh-oh, and I looked over and the bass player kind of gave me that side smile, you know, the thing musicians do. Like, I heard that. And that's exactly what I mean. You're kind of walking the tightrope when you're playing these solos. Nowhere Man's a great example of that as well. Everyone knows every note you're going to play pretty much. Good luck with that final natural harmonic, by the way, as well. It's on the first string, 5th fret. So if your adrenaline's going, sometimes it's hard to be that accurate. You got to be like pinpoint accuracy for that to be ringing out perfectly. The last example for soloing I'll do is the Tell There Was You solo, which is one of those kind of tricky solos that you do have to nail every note, obviously. The craziest part of all of it is George has nothing to hide behind. You know, a lot of us guitar players who play different styles, we could use effects, we could use distortion, and so you could cover things up pretty well. But when it comes to just the way George plays and his tone, it all has to be clean pretty much, and it's all right out there. It's in the raw, if you will. This is just a side note, but George often played big hollow bodies or semi-hollow body guitars, and those could be a bit cumbersome live. And of course, they're all wearing tight suits back in the old days. And, you know, if you look at their shoes, they got these big heels in the back, and that couldn't have been very comfortable to have to play, and then have to play these intricate parts like that. Must have been a wild time. I'm so lucky that most of the time I just get to wear a t-shirt and jeans on stage with, you know, regular shoes. I mentioned before that George would sing lead once in a while. And if you watch their infamous Washington, D.C. concert, he actually gets to sing the first tune. But another tricky aspect of George Harrison is the way he sang backup vocals. I was watching this Joe Walsh instructional, and he was explaining that there's a third harmony that he calls the ghost harmony.
Okay, there's a third part in there.
And it's really hard to hear if you're listening to it. It's hard to decipher it from the other main parts. Well, when I had to prepare for this show, I had to learn those parts, and I had the hardest time getting those in my head, to get them in my ear correctly. I actually got these 2 books, you know, the infamous red and blue tab books. I had these on CD as well, but the red one and then the blue one, I played so much that the back just kind of tore off after a while. I love that meme where they show that picture and they go, this is what it looks like after the Beatles just threw you off the edge of the rail right there. George Harrison's backup vocals could be easily taken for granted until you take it away and you hear what it would be like without him in the mix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop the harmony parts using the guitar today, and I'll start with John's part for like Nowhere Man. Now I'm going to add Paul's harmony to that, which is no picnic either. Paul had a naturally higher register, so it's amazing to people like me that he could sing this high so easily, but I'm sure to him it was just kind of normal for him, but still very impressive. So he would go like this over the top of it. Now, that sounds good, right? Wait till I add George's part. When I was recording this way back in time, I had a 4-track. It was a cassette Tascam 424, I believe. And what's weird about it is I would learn each part from the book using notation, and I would sing them separately. And then I slowly brought in that third fader, and I heard George's part mixed with it, and it was just like a jaw-dropping moment. So this is George's part. Isn't it weird how it just comes to life with that third harmony? It just glues it together in a great way. Now let's add the chords behind it and you can hear the whole thing. That's a work of art right there. Let's do another one. Let's do Day Tripper. Once again, I'll start with John's part. The next part, I believe, was Paul's part. It's the highest one, that's why I assume that, but you never know. If you just heard that, it sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? It almost has like this Asian sound to it. My timing was a little crappy there, but let's add George's part and you can hear how it fills everything in.
Learn that third part, the ghost part as we call it.
So you can imagine how much I had to practice hearing the harmony correct to come in with George's part. I actually have a little bit of a way to cheat on stage. If I can't quite remember where to start, whatever we're playing right before the harmony comes in, I'll do like a cheat note. I'll be like, dun, dun, dun. I'll just play it real quick. And then I'll sing it in my head. So when it's time to sing it, I'll start there. It's like having a pitch pipe or something. Although with Nowhere Man, it's the first thing you do in the tune, so it's really hard to do that cheating note. So I learned right away that George has some big shoes to fill when it comes to covering his stuff live. Big old brown shoes, I guess you could say. Besides all the trickiness that he had to pull off live, he actually became one of the best writers in the Beatles towards the end. Back in the mid to early Beatles, I really loved the song, If I Needed Someone. It was a great one. Same with Taxman. And then later, his songwriting ability just went next level. Because he wrote When My Guitar Gently Weeps, he wrote Here Comes the Sun, and then a lot of people's favorite Beatles tune is Something. So it's really cool to watch George evolve over the years of the Beatles, because they were only around for so many years. If you think of all the stuff they did for music and then realize they did it in such a short amount of time, it's pretty mind-blowing. I should also mention that he was a good presence in the band. If you watch the Get Back documentary, this is where I really saw it. He was real chill. There's even a scene where he's just playing, doing his part, and then Paul gets a little bit in his face and he's like, I'll just play whatever you want me to play, man. And sadly, he ended up quitting during that time for a little while. And then they saw firsthand what it was like to lose your footwork. So I think the importance of George and the band was finally appreciated after that. Sometimes it takes quitting, I guess. I don't know. Let me know in the comments section if you agree with me and if you believe as well that George may have had the most tricky role when it came to playing live. All right, everybody, we'll catch you soon. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye. That's a cool effect.